Good morning, everyone. I'm Amber Augie, the Education Coordinator with ASA Education Foundation. Welcome to the ASA Women in Industry webinar entitled Best Practices for Sales Compensation with presenters Andrew Horvath and Anne-Marie Verhamy from Alexander Group. During today's session, your mic will be muted. However, you will be able to send us questions using the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We will then read the questions at the end of the presentation. Today's presentation is also being recorded and will be available for viewing within the next few days on the ASA Women in Industry page. Also, ASA does its own compensation study, and you can learn more about it on ASA's website under Business Intelligence. Okay, let's get started with today's session. I'd like to begin with a quick shout out to Women in Industry Division for sponsoring today's webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce Director Andrew Horvath and Consultant Anne-Marie Verhamy from Alexander Group. In this morning's session, Andrew and Anne-Marie will discuss best practices for sales compensation. Welcome to you both, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Amber. This is Andrew Horvath at the Alexander Group. Thrilled to be here presenting to everybody that's dialed in. We've been told that this is the most popular and best attended webinar so far, and that's great to hear. Not surprising, as compensation experts, we know that anytime you put sales compensation in the title line for an invitation, people tend to show up. So first tip of the day, if you ever have any staff meetings that aren't getting full attendance or participation, tack on the line about end sales compensation discussion, and you'll see your attendance skyrocket. All right, so quick introduction for myself and Anne-Marie. I mentioned Andrew Horvath, I'm a director with the Alexander Group. We are a sales and marketing consulting organization. We are focused on the revenue growth initiatives, and we have a specialty in sales compensation. As far as myself, been at Alexander Group for over 5 years in our Chicago office, and actually head up our distribution practice. So everything you'll hear today about sales compensation certainly applies to multiple industries, but we took a closer look at how it really applies to your industry specifically. And I do quite a bit of work with distributors and wholesalers across several different subsegments. Anne-Marie?
Hi, this is Emery Verhamy. I'm a consultant with the Alexander Group. I've been with the firm for about 3 years. Similar with Andrew, I've done a lot of work with sales compensation as well as the kind of upfront portion of our revenue growth model, but a focus on sales compensation as well as quota design and implementation of the sales compensation program. So for today, we're going to be talking through these 3 major areas, which would be the importance of sales compensation. We'll run through a sales compensation diagnostic, and then we'll talk through call to action and then have a Q&A. So when we talk about sales compensation, it drives both top and bottom line. So with the top line, it reinforces our sales strategy and drives desired selling behaviors. So for our organization, is it important that we be driving new business, grow existing accounts, or is there a particular product that we want our salespeople to be focused on? And we also want to use the sales compensation program to motivate our reps to hit and achieve their goals. As well as the bottom line. So as you can see here, a significant portion of all sales expenses comes from sales compensation. So it's important that as we design and evaluate a sales compensation program, we're making sure that those dollars are being used effectively and that there are no leaks in the plan, making it more expensive than would be necessary. So best-in-class programs. What we see in those kinds of programs, you've got a well-designed plan that's aligned to our sales strategy. So we know where, as an organization, we want to be going, and our sales compensation program lines up to that. We've effectively communicated how the plan works, the payout frequency, all those different aspects of the sales compensation program to our team so that they understand exactly how it works and how they'll be paid. There's an efficient administration. There is a timely and ongoing assessment of the plan to make sure that it's encouraging and motivating our reps to behave the way that we want. And then there's a clear process and governance for any ongoing plan design, that we document our process that we use so that it's repeatable and that we capture the best practices that we internally used to design the sales compensation program. Having all of those aspects helps us drive and improve the top line. It helps us effectively manage our costs, and it helps us avoid the risk associated with the sales compensation program.
Yeah, sales compensation is a extremely powerful lever in the organization. We advocate that it doesn't solve all of the issues in a sales organization, but certainly is a powerful tool we have at our disposal. So what you'll see throughout the presentation here is the benefits of a well-designed plan. It's not just a thought process or thought experiment to make sure that we check the box on best-in-class plans. Distributors are having some trouble attracting and retaining the new next generation of talent. So we want to make sure that our plans are designed correctly so that we can have them fuel our business and hit our goals, but also be attractive to folks in industry to attract the top talent that we're looking for.
So moving into the sales compensation diagnostic, first we want to review quickly the revenue growth model. This is who we are as the Alexander Group and what we do. So it's a framework for taking our go-to-customer or go-to-market strategies and converting that into really actionable go-to-customer practices. So we bucket our work into three major areas, which would be strategy. So what customers do we want to call on? What messaging resonates with those customers? And what revenue motions do we need to use to make sure that we're engaging them when it would be necessary? Then we've got structure. So what are the roles and organizational structure? How many resources and what's a reasonable workload for those resources to make sure that we can execute that strategy that we've designed? And then the main bucket that we're going to be focusing on today would be management. So these pillars focus on the management programs that we use, and of particular importance would be pillars 8 and 9, where we focus on our quotas. So what are the goals that we're assigning to each territory or individual? And then what's the sales compensation program the mechanics of the sales compensation program that's going to drive the desired behaviors that we've identified in our strategy and that are aligned to the roles and responsibilities we've designed in the structure. So a lot of times in our work, we're brought in to focus on a sales compensation plan to help redesign and evaluate what that plan's doing. And a lot of times we'll find that there are actually upstream issues that are not allowing the plan to be effective. So if we haven't designed, if the sales roles have changed, but we didn't change the sales compensation program, that can be one of those issues where the sales compensation program isn't going to be able to work the way we wanted it to.
Yeah, case in point for your industry specifically, we get called in a lot to look at the formulas for sales comp plans, and maybe folks are using a commission plan, flat or ramped commission plan based on gross profit dollars, and their growth has been stalled for a couple of years, and we think that maybe by adjusting the rates, we can influence growth. So if we raise the rates, people will want to sell more. If we cut the rates, people will have to sell more to go make up what they lost in the rates. And oftentimes when you look back in the pillar 6 for sizing and deployment, or pillar 5 for job design, what you'll find is some jobs don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to actually be more productive because we've overloaded them with accounts and they don't have time to both maintain their current base and grow new, or they are tasked with doing other things besides selling. So maybe we've asked them to be a seller as well as a field tech or customer service representative. So no matter how much you put behind the comp plan, in those instances where the job is blended or corrupted, or if the job doesn't align with the opportunity so that the bandwidth is exceeded, there's only so much you can do with sales comp plans. So as Emery mentioned, a lot of times we look at the plan and say, there's some quick fixes there and we can improve it. Other times it does require some alignment with other upstream strategic and structural items to make sure the comp plan is, you're getting the most bang for your buck out of that comp plan.
Yep, absolutely. So thinking about our sales compensation programs, We've got some example problem statements that are relatively common when we're evaluating our sales compensation program and deciding that it may not be working for us anymore. So the first example here would be strategy and job. So to the example Andrew provided, our strategy and the job roles have evolved, and the sales compensation program is no longer incentivizing the behaviors and outcomes that we wanted from that role. And then there's a misallocation of funds. So we're investing in our sales compensation plan, but it's not paying for the results that we wanted. For example, if there's a particular new product and that's the funds that we're allocating to that particular new product trying to drive those behaviors, it's not getting what we want. So that would be an issue of figuring out why that is. Third example would be recruitment and retention. So our sales compensation program is not attracting and retaining high-level talent. We're either not able to get them through the interview process or they don't stick around. For example, in a commission plan, if our new reps come into the organization and they get a small territory, it's going to take them a few years to be able to build that up and make the kind of money that our more tenured salespeople are making. Those kinds of challenges can prevent us from retaining the talent that we want to have. And then finally, program management. So in the administration of our sales compensation program, there are errors or ultimately mistrust in the payout accuracy of what the payouts, the disconnect between what the salespeople think they should be making and what they're actually earning.
And specifically for your industry, you think about an example for each of these. Strategy and job, for a long time we've sold the core product, and now we want to sell the new or growth product. Not at the expense of the core, but in addition to the core. The strategy has changed. The job has changed. If we ask folks to do that, sell the growth product, and don't align our comp plans to do it, they can certainly get away with selling what they've always sold and make the same amount of money, and our new product is left to just sit in the shelves. The misallocation of funds, typically in distribution, you see that bigger is better in terms of territory size. And the question is, how do we allocate the right amount of budget towards growth while not disincentivizing folks maintaining large territories, but how much do we value that next dollar from a new customer or a new product or cross-selling, for example? So understanding the split there and how to direct comp money. Recruitment and retention, Emery mentioned that as a new seller in an organization, you might have a smaller territory, and on a traditional flat commission plan linked to gross profit dollars, you might not have an opportunity to make a ton of money in your first couple of years. The promise has always been stick around for your career and you'll make good money later on. But I will tell you that the dreaded M word, millennials, do not like that value proposition. They want to have access to as much upside as anybody in the organization, provided they do a good job. They usually wait till their second or third year to want to be the VP of sales, but that's a whole nother webinar. In the program management, the biggest pain point here is target setting. So we've worked with several clients that are in their infancy in terms of setting individual territory level targets for their sellers. Having that accountability out there to say that, our bonuses as leadership depend on us hitting our number, and your bonus should depend on you hitting a number as well. It's our only lever to really impact that at the field level. So the program management, we're seeing a move towards getting that quota setting methodology into the organization. And right now it's relatively new and it's baby steps for the moment. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the diagnostic, but those are generally the issues that we see across these 4 examples in your industry.
So moving into the sales compensation diagnostic, we tend to bucket diagnosing a sales compensation program into 2 major areas. So the first would be inputs and design. So diagnosing if our sales compensation program is designed to accurately and effectively to drive the desired behaviors. So the inputs, are they designed the right way? The next piece would be the outputs. So diagnosing if the sales compensation program is driving the right relationship between pay and performance. Or if there, in the example Andrew provided, if we want our salespeople to be driving growth, are we rewarding that? What's the relationship between territory growth and pay? So we've got some examples of questions that may, depending on the answer, may indicate a need for sales compensation redesign. So the first example here would be, how many performance measures are included in the sales compensation plan for each role? Our experience tells us that there should be no more than 3 to 4 performance measures in the sales compensation plan for a role. So if you have more than those performance measures, you'd consider redesigning in order to drive focus. So the reason we want to limit the number of performance measures is it allows our sales representatives to focus on those areas that are of most importance to us. Some other common questions in the distribution space would be, what quota allocation methodology do you use? So in the project that Andrew and I recently worked with, the answer to that question was, we use a peanut butter spread for sales quotas. So if we as an organization need to grow 10%, everyone's going to get a 10% growth rate on their number from last year. So the idea is, can we allocate quota based on the opportunity that's unique to each territory, which will allow us to reward individuals based on the actual nature and dynamics within their own territory. Another common question in the distribution space would be, which roles are on a sales compensation plan? So all roles, even those who do not interact with the client or drive outcomes. If the answer to that question is all roles, we would argue that you only want roles that are eligible for sales compensation because they are communicating with the client, they can drive outcomes that are beneficial to our organization. So if a customer service rep who's really on the back end fulfillment piece can't persuade the customer to purchase, then we would argue that that role should not, or should not be on sales compensation. But there may be other aspects of pay that could be used, like an add-on bonus. And then another answer to that question would be few roles. Some sellers are on an add-on bonus or base pay only plans. So for that, we'd argue, while sales compensation is a decision that the organization makes, if we want those sellers to be putting pay at risk to motivate certain behaviors, we may want to consider putting them on a sales compensation plan.
Yeah, a couple thoughts here on recent experiences. You know, the first item there about moving to plans that have 3, we do prefer 3 or fewer measures. 4 sometimes if it's a outstanding circumstance. But a lot of plans that we come across are, call it the menu of options plan, or the buffet plan, where you've got a commission rate tied to product groups, or in the probably the most detailed sense, each SKU. And the issue there is, if you provide everything under the sun and we compensate it in a different way, we give our folks the ability to pick and choose what they do. And it's very hard to change behaviors, ask folks to do things that they haven't done in the past, but that are important to our strategy going forward, if we give them unlimited options within the plan. So the 1, 2, or 3 measures is not to try to restrict people and sales leaders in designing plans. It's really to understand, hey, if my folks roll out of bed in the morning and they jump in their car to go to their first call, what are the 3 things they have to do? What are the 3 things that I would consider, if they get it done that day, is a good day for them? I go sell a whole bunch of stuff. I go sell our whole product set or cross-sell to certain customers, and I go introduce myself to a brand new customer and gain their business or get on their approved list. You know, things like that help to inform sales comp design and keep the plans very focused. We have a question here I wanted to address. I think it makes sense here as we think about the job alignment with the comp plan. So the question is about job design, specifically farmers and hunters. So this individual, possibly more farmers in the organization, but they need to move towards more of a hunter approach. The question is, how do you identify folks that have that hunter DNA in the organization, and where do you go find folks that do? So your managers know a lot about your sellers that you may not. They're the ones who hopefully are meeting with them on a regular cadence, weekly, at least monthly, to account plan, to carve up their territories and figure out where the growth is coming from. They know a lot of the behaviors these folks are exhibiting, their skills. What we like to do is track it back to your customer set. So, you know, are we looking at, net new customers, or looking to turn on new centers within a certain customer, new buyers, new departments, whatever it is, and then craft the job, the hunter job, to reflect that. So it's more of a long cycle, spec intensive job. That's going to be a different role than someone who's out there banging on doors in more of a transactional sense. But we like to craft the job appropriately, and then once we construct the job, we would design a competency model. So competency model is call it the 5 or 6 categories of skills that we expect this job to have, and get very specific about what those skills are. Once you have that competency model identified for the new job, the hunter job, call it, you would get folks that know, your sales managers, to assess your individuals that are in the organization already. And a lot of times you'll find that some folks are a great fit for that new role. It's what they want to do. Other times you'll find that you've got folks that do a lot of the asks that we're looking for, but we need to train up on a couple. And that leads to discussions about internal or external training, coaching with their manager to make sure that they've embraced that new role. So a lot of times we see that hunter role, the DNA exists in some folks who already have, and grabbing folks from within industry and outside of industry that have that experience building territories is also something that we do see. But crafting the job and the aligned competency model is the first step there. Last thought here, before Emery moves on, you can see how pretty quickly sales quotas will sound the alarm bells if something upstream isn't correct. So working with a client right now, they're pushing down their 2018 growth number, and there's no arguing with that goal as it's been set by leadership. The sales managers are spreading that out. They're allocating it to the different sales teams, and the sales teams are allocating it to their different individuals. And what we found is that no one seems to think their goal is reasonable. And that's based on the benchmark productivity of a distribution field seller that we know what that is, as well as the historical revenue and gross profit. There's really a big jump from past till future. And what that tells you is, are folks sandbagging? Maybe. But the case has to be made that if none of our folks and managers really think they can get to our growth number and it's supported by data, maybe we have a resource deployment issue. Maybe that is making the case. If we certainly see our next year growth number as reasonable, we don't have the people to go do it. So that's a case to say, to hit this number, we have to invest in 5 or 10 or 15 more bodies to get there. So you can see how pretty quickly, when the comp plan can't solve everything, it leads us to the parts of the organization that can help us solve it.
And then moving into the output or results diagnostic. So this would be those looking back at how the plan worked to figure out if the results of that plan were what we expected and if we need to redesign our sales compensation program as a result of those findings. So a common analysis we would do for an organization during the assessment phase would be analyzing the compensation cost of sales. So the idea here is for every $100 of revenue that our salesperson's bringing in, what percentage of that are we spending on sales compensation? So for example, if the sales compensation is very high, the sales compensation cost of sales is very high or it's growing rapidly, we'd want to look into why that is, why our revenue may not be growing fast enough, but our sales compensation costs are, or what the relationship is there. Another common analysis we'd want to run would be determining what percentage of our reps are exceeding their sales quota. So we would look at the distribution of performance across all of our sales organizations to figure out how many people are exceeding their quota, how many people are performing well below their sales quota, and that'll help us understand what the relationship is between our reps' performance and our quota setting. So typically we would see about 50 to 60% of the sales reps meeting goal, with about less than 20 of reps really exceeding goal, and then we'd want 20% or less, and closer to this 10% of people who are not hitting their goal or below a threshold where they're not earning any of their incentive pay. And then another analysis we'd want to run would be how close is our total actual pay linked to performance against annual goals. So the idea here is, and which is common in the work that we've done in the space, would be that the growth in comp costs is outpacing the growth from the territory. So what's the relationship between the pay and those annual goals? Are our territories growing faster than our sales compensation costs are? And a lot of times we'll find that there are other things that are more closely tied to pay than actual territory growth, for example, tenure. So we want to make sure that we really are rewarding the right behaviors and rewarding those people who are able to grow their territories through new business, but also retaining and penetrating the accounts based on what the strategy for that role is.
I think a couple points here. The boom bust issue, you can see how that's related to relatively, peanut butter spread or generic quota setting. We certainly work with a lot of folks that say the reps tell us that we make money every other year at this organization. No good year goes unpunished, stuff like that. So understanding that it's good for us to make sure that we have transparency into how we're going to get our number this year and consistency. It's also better for the seller to be able to produce at a consistent level and earn a consistent income year in, year out versus, peaking and having to save a whole bunch for next year when they're going to hit a trough. So we look at that with quota setting is a lever to help with that. And again, the talent piece, comp is one of the several tools and several benefits organizations ought to publish when they try to recruit new talent. If you try to solve everything with a comp plan by offering the highest rates in the industry or the highest base salary in the industry, whatever you want to go after there, it's tough to sustain that. So while we work with organizations to understand what their comp philosophy is, are you at the 50th percentile of the industry? Are you at the 75th for total pay? It certainly has to work in concert with other things like career path. If folks really look into the car allowance, for example, other sort of perks that go along with it, and also growth within their organization.
Yep, absolutely. As well as the turnover of our top performers. Another question on here is not only are we able to retain hire top talent, but are we experiencing a lot of turnover from our top performers?
I got a question here that relates to one of the items here. So the question is about the compensation cost of sales. So, in terms of an industry-specific number, the numbers are relatively all over the place, I'd say, for actuals. When we work with organizations, our benchmarks are, by the way, tied to revenue, which is easily translated into gross margin. But we typically see that if you're exceeding 10% comp cost of sales, 10% of revenue, that's high. And comp cost of sales, by the way, is the base salaries plus variable budget. So we're not looking at benefits, we're not looking at car allowances, phone reimbursements, all that stuff. It's strictly base plus variable, summed up for the organization across compared against revenue. We do have some more specific benchmarks in our distribution study, so we can, if anyone's interested, certainly let us know and we can set up a call to discuss that. But generally speaking, 10% of top line, you're paying a little bit more than you ought to.
Great. So now moving to our call of action and Q&A. So we see the best-in-class sales compensation programs having the following practices in place. So first, they develop a finite set of platform jobs. So a platform job would be kind of a job family. A platform job would allow us to say, these are the responsibilities of that role, while there may be some flavors within it. Second would be to develop a set of component guidelines and principles for the designers to use. and then apply those component guidelines to each of those platform jobs. And it also helps us define those goalposts for saying, what is the relationship between base salary and the variable component, for example. And then third would be governance and process. So ensuring that we have the right governance model to manage the program and documenting the front to back process that we use so that all parties involved know what to do and how to do it and when. So whether it be HR, finance, sales leadership, all of those roles that may be involved in the designing of a sales compensation program, what are the responsibilities that they have and the timing to do so? So we'll be walking through each of these in a little more detail. First would be platform jobs. So once you've developed that set of platform jobs, some examples here. So we know that there's this job breakdown and the focus of the jobs that leads us to know what kind of platform job it falls into. So are they persuading the end user? And are they closing new business? And is that particular to a specialized offering? So then you can move through that decision tree to know that a particular role may be a product sales rep, an inside product sales rep, or a product specialist, or some kind of overlay role where they're helping the sales reps sell a particular product. This type of
the idea here is that we come across organizations that have what they consider too many plans, and they tell us, hey, we've got 10 different sales comp plans. And having multiple plans is not always a bad idea. In fact, it's usually a pretty good idea. But you have to have the right number of plans for the right number of platform jobs. So as Emery was saying, you have the list of platform jobs in the right there. And by the way, there are 37 sales jobs in the world. There's a million titles, but there are 37 jobs that are different enough that we would call them something different as a platform job. If you have those jobs in your organization, most of you probably have a strategic account manager, a field sales rep, maybe an inside sales rep, maybe a product specialist. Those platform jobs ought to have their own unique sales comp plan. So when we work with a company that says, I've got 8 sales comp plans, and one of them is a business development rep, one's a territory manager, one's an inside sales manager, that's great. When they have 8 or 12 or 15 plans, and they only have 1 or 2 job roles, but they've got Jimmy's plan and Johnny's plan and Kim's plan, that is a bit of an issue when you have multiple different plans that are ad hoc and potentially are paying different to the same job.
Yep, and documenting these attributes that allow us to make this decision tree will allow us to, if someone were to come up to you and say, I have a new role, I want to put them on a sales compensation program, this will allow you to use the decision tree to say, actually that role that you're proposing is pretty similar to something we already have. So for the sake of consistency, let's consider using the same sales compensation plan for that role, for that new role. Then moving into principles and guidelines. So the idea here is that before you start diving into the specific design of your sales compensation program, you want to first understand on the left-hand side here is what's the performance management program, or what's our philosophy, confirming that with the leadership team. So understanding what our culture is, because it's very important that our sales compensation reflect that culture. Whether or not we're very results-driven or institution-driven, for example, those cultures would lead to 2 different types of sales compensation plans that align to that culture, and there's no dissonance there. In the market we want to be playing in terms of pay levels for the specific talent. So figuring out what those pay discrimination practices would be. And then third would be the total reward structure. So figuring out how the sales compensation plan fits into the overall reward structure. Other components being potentially a recognition program or contest, how that may relate to our base salary and variable compensation program.
Yeah, for the pay for performance philosophy, when we talk about pay discrimination, it's certainly nothing malicious. What we're talking about is how do you differentiate the pay, the actual pay, for folks that we would consider high performers, medium performers, and low performers. And there's really two dimensions here. It's, as an organization, how do you want to set that median level of pay against the market and internally against other jobs? That's one data point. The other data point is, how steep do we want that slope, that difference between if you blow out your quota in a given year, you're making enough to go buy yourself a lake house, versus the guys and gals who miss their quota and maybe even miss threshold, they can't afford to work here anymore after a year or two of that level. Some organizations are more aggressive about that differentiation. Some have that the high and low a little closer together in terms of total pay. It is a question that we always research and have the client answer up front, because the relationship between pay and performance and that differentiation informs a lot of the choices downstream. So if you're a place that doesn't like to have a lot of differentiation, yet you want aggressive ramped commission rates after goal, that doesn't quite match up to your philosophy.
Then moving into the third piece of a best-in-class sales compensation program would be governance and process. So making sure that we're defining the processes, the rules, and the timing involved in designing an ongoing evaluation of the sales compensation program. So there'd be the governance structure, which would be those key stakeholders, who's responsible, accountable for the different activities. If you're familiar with the RACI model, a lot of times that will be used in this process. And then there's the actual process, where we're outlining the detailed steps that should be used and have been used for designing the sales compensation program. And then you've got that roles and responsibilities matrix, where it's taking that process and assigning the specific owners to each of those activities. There's a calendar. So the idea is that we would typically recommend that on an annual basis that we're evaluating the design of our sales compensation program, if not on a more frequent basis quarterly, to understand what's our relationship between pay and performance. And then escalation procedures. So if there are any issues that should come up throughout the year with the sales compensation program, what are the procedures for addressing those? For example, if there's a windfall or something in a particular territory where we don't know how to handle it, we want to make sure that we're handling those things in a time-sensitive manner. And then terms and definitions. So it's really important as part of our communication to the sales organization about the sales compensation program that we're very clear by what we mean by the terms we're using, because it can be pretty technical, and a lot of times there can be confusion on what we mean by the word commission versus compensation. So those kinds of things, we want to make sure that we're really clear, so that when we're communicating our sales compensation program, our reps know how it's going to be working, our sales managers know how to explain it to their reps, so that there's no confusion.
Yeah, this governance process may look somewhat intimidating or over-engineered, call it, but you're doing this already in a lot of ways. You might not have your own sales compensation or sales operations group, but we see this done already in a lot of organizations, just kind of behind the scenes. It's almost in the skunk works, right? So you're doing all this stuff. The question is, how can you make it more efficient, more consistent, and you get the outcomes from it that you want, and use folks' time to the best of their ability. So this is a typical process here. It's going to vary organization by organization depending on how big your program is, how many roles you have, how complex the plans are. But we do recommend having a well thought out governance and process here. Two quick items. Alex, I apologize. There's a hand raised there. It's been raised for a couple minutes. New to this webinar technology. If you've got a question, happy to entertain it. Oh, never mind. There was a misraised hand. We do have a question though from somebody about past due accounts receivable and pay. So I think the question here is probably if we're paying folks on orders, and someone's producing a couple of big orders, and all of a sudden our customer isn't paying, how do we handle that? Do we potentially claw back that credit that we've already given them from accounts that haven't paid us? How do we address that in the plan? you have options here. You know, what I've seen not work so well is when you have sales reps that have to cleave off about 40% of their time as bill collectors. They can certainly get the job done there. They're probably more effective than anybody else in the organization if push comes to shove. But for every minute they're spending on hunting down people for past due, then it's a minute they're not spending on sales. What we tend to recommend is, you know, choose whether you want to pay on orders or actual sales. Orders are obviously closer to the persuasion event, and that's more meaningful to folks if they make the sale and they get paid for it. That's a good way to reinforce a job well done. But if we have issues with, you know, credit or bad accounts, we have to revisit if that's possible to pay on orders. The big question is, does the salesperson, when they've been given their plan, do they have control over how they're credited? So if you're crediting me on orders and you're telling me stay away from the bill collection, we have a team to do that, and then you ding me later on because one of my accounts didn't pay, that's unfair to me. So it's all about what can they control, what are we comfortable measuring on, and what are the internal processes we have to be able to make sure we don't throw money away.
So just a quick recap of the benefits of having a well-executed program management model. So with the platform jobs, it helps us reduce the proliferation of roles, and it helps us drive organizational alignment and make plan design more simple. With principle, guidelines, and goalposts, it makes sure that we're aligning our culture, the corporate objectives, and our sales strategy to the sales compensation program. And that we're thinking through what Andrew was discussing is what type of talent are we trying to recruit from the market, and making sure that our pay levels represent that. And then the governance and process. So making sure that the plan is rolled out in a timely manner, that quotas are communicated in a timely manner, that payouts are accurate, and that there's a continuous assessment, evaluation, and ultimately improvement on the sales compensation program. Making sure that whatever risks associated with the sales compensation program and those payout timeliness and accuracy, that we're mitigating all those risks as quickly as possible. So last slide here, we've got kind of a list of common dysfunctions and making sure that we're thinking through these things as it relates to sales compensation program. So we've got financial pitfalls, making sure that we're not overpaying if our performance is skewed to the right of 100% quota attainment, or if we have a bimodal distribution. When we're looking at our quota distribution, those tend to indicate that we're overpaying. And also, if we have majority of people exceeding their quota, we've got a culture of winning on the other side of the equation. If majority of our salespeople are below quota, that's a culture of losing. So understanding what the implications are there. Crediting mistakes, making sure that we're avoiding any appeasement paying, double crediting, trailing crediting, that we're very deliberate with how that crediting works. For example, if we've got two resources that are calling on the same account, what's that crediting look like, and making sure that there are no mistakes there. And then formula mistakes. So if there's an aggressive ramp, aggressive upside earnings, making sure if that's the case that we're very deliberate with how we're setting quotas to mitigate the risk of overpaying. And then, for example, using a threshold. So a threshold would be at what percent of quota attainment does a sales representative not earn any incentive pay. So it communicates a minimum performance expectation to the organization. So how are we using that if we are to make sure that we're not paying for below performance? And then program mistakes, making sure that we're being deliberate with how our quotas are being set, and if and when we would ever want to provide quota relief. Territory and account, so making sure that any territory reassignments or account changes are thought through and reflected in the sales compensation program. Administration mistakes, So making sure that our math is correct, so that if we're providing an estimator or a compensation calculator, that what a rep can calculate on their own based on the performance they've had matches with what they're actually being paid. And then policy and legal mistakes. So obviously, sales compensation programs risk, making sure that we've communicated through our terms and conditions how the sales compensation program is going to work, so that we're not leaving ourselves liable to be sued, for example.
Great. A couple questions here I wanted to entertain. One of them was about the comp cost of sales, and was that 10% number as a benchmark sales or gross profit. That's a sales number. So it's a top line number that if it exceeds 10%, there ought to be a reason for that. We see that as kind of our center practice for budgets. The other question is about sales jobs. So are sellers truly persuading customers, or are they more order takers? The difference being, how do I want to allocate my comp to folks that are essentially taking care of business that comes in already versus ones that are actively growing their accounts and territories? And the question mentions that it's probably about jobs, and it is about jobs. So understanding how the job plays in the overall customer coverage map. So we more and more distributors are looking to segment their customers. In our survey from earlier this year, we saw that I think 60% of our participants already do some sort of segmentation, whether it's big, medium, small, or they align it to some sort of a buyer behavior, and another 20% are actively looking to develop segmentation. Once you figure that out and look at your sales process, your support process, you start to lay out what we call a coverage map and put certain jobs against those customer segments. If you've got more transactional business that essentially is run rate stuff, it's coming in regardless, and it's able to be satisfied by inbound inside sales folks, there's certainly a choice to be made. Do we put them on sales comp, or do we put them on salary plus an add-on bonus? It all depends on if they qualify across 4 dimensions to be a salesperson. Do they have persuasion ability? Are they active in the sales process? Do they essentially have say over the final close? And then do they have measurable sales goals? If those are true, then you have the option to put them on sales comp. If they're strictly writing orders that we could put on customer service, maybe not. Okay. So that's the content we have for today. Had some good questions so far, and we're certainly happy to entertain more. But if you learned something from today, really is that sales comp is a extremely powerful and emotional lever that we have as a sales organization and as a distributor to affect our strategy in the field. It's not the only enablement tool we have at our disposal, but done right, a sales comp plan should reflect your growth strategy. It should allow for your sellers to do the same things that they're doing to get 5s in their performance reviews and get paid for it. And it should enable us to attract very good talent and pay them appropriately for their outputs. You've seen some of the issues that have come up, stalled growth, or stretched bandwidth, or poor job definition, call it, and how those impact sales comp plans. So if I'm sure folks are going to go ahead and bring up their plan documents for their organization and check it against this to see, should I be looking at a plan redesign? That's the first question. The second question should be, is the issue I'm having right now strictly because my plan is outdated, or is it because I have upstream issues with my sales model that should be addressed? So having said that, certainly open to questions. We have a couple minutes left here. Our place in this sales comp universe, I think we've mentioned, we work with organizations, and I work with distributors primarily, to fix their sales models. I've mentioned the study we did with 25 distributors across a couple segments. It really highlighted a lot of trends that are impacting the ability to grow in distribution. The comp issue came up as one of the most important ones to get right in that study, as it typically does. And the idea here is that the market is changing, the competitors are changing, folks are getting smarter, our customers know more than ever before. The sales model as it existed in the past, while not something to throw away, certainly has to evolve. And it has to evolve intelligently for different segments. So, folks on the phone are probably have heard about Amazon stealing their business now for a while. Is it a race to the bottom for everybody? Should we all be competing on price and develop a slick e-channel? The answer is maybe for some segments. There's value that distributors bring in terms of local market knowledge, in terms of account development, in terms of relationships, in terms of value beyond product that Amazon will never be able to recreate. So how do you harness that value proposition and enable your folks to deliver that through tools such as compensation? And that really starts with re-examining your sales model. So certainly happy to take any questions now. Also, you have our information, Emery and myself. Always happy to set time to discuss with you your comp issues or anything else that may have piqued your interest here. Do you have a question, actually? So the question about pay mix. So base pay versus commission. Where is the industry going, and what type of split seems to be common? The industry is undergoing a shift that tech saw 15 years ago, that manufacturing saw and began to see about 10 years ago, and still finishing the movement from a income producer model where you've got folks that essentially are have their own little businesses within your organization, to more of a sales rep approach, where the seller is a representative of our company and they deliver the value of us. And they certainly have good relationships, but it's really about the relationship being the companies, not the individual salespersons. The old income producer used to be straight commission, right? We gave them the phone book for the state of Tennessee and a commission rate, and go sell whatever you want, and didn't need much more out of them than that. That's moving towards a more managed seller approach, where we say we care about where we get our gross profit dollars, and we have an expectation for you. And oh, by the way, we're giving you all this backup and support, so we need you to do a couple things for us. And that's taken care of by us paying you a base salary. Now, we're going to still give you variable pay, and we're going to let you accelerate that variable pay and earn a whole bunch of money if you go beyond your goal. But we're going to stick you with, let's call it a 60-40 pay mix now. Out of your 100% of your actual pay, we envision that 60% comes from base salary and 40% comes from variable pay if you achieve 100% of your goals. Anything more than 50-50, so anything more slanted towards variable pay than 50-50, that would be more of an income producer approach. Anything north of 50-50 for base salary, between 50-50 and call it 80-20, and that's even a little aggressive, would be a typical pay mix that the industry is moving towards. All right, so still, if anyone's got any lingering questions, please send them along. I think to follow up on my last thought, again, happy to discuss with anybody both your current issues with the planning, with your sales model, as well as if you're interested in a readout from our distribution study. We have a non-participant readout that we are happy to walk through, and there's always the option to submit your own data, get in the participant set, and we can investigate things like expense to gross margin dollars percentage, and that's one of those that are similar to comp cost of sales, but it's taking into account more than just comp. It's overall seller expense, for example. All right. Well, Amber, I think we are out of questions here, so I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, both Andrew and Anne-Marie, for leading today's webinar. I definitely learned all kinds of new information. As I mentioned earlier, the recording will be available on ASA's website under Women in Industry. I'd like to let everyone know that the registration for Women in Industry Spring Conference in Savannah, Georgia is open, so please register and take advantage of those early bird rates while you can. Thank you everyone for participating today, and the Women in Industry Division looks forward to providing more education and networking opportunities for the industry. Have a great day.